Hello and welcome back to part 3 of my series of videos where I'm taking a look at the WD-RED series of drives that have been reported to utilize DMSMR or Drive Managed Single Magnetic Recording and how they compare against the new WD-RED CMR drives. Now, it's worth highlighting straight away that I say the word new. It's not really new. It's a rebranding. The model ID is exactly the same. It is about separating the series between WD-RED and WD-RED Plus. And ultimately, although I've done these tests before, the drives I've received are part of the WD-RED Plus series, the CMR drives. So what I want to see is, are we going to see any changes between these and the testing we did quite a few months ago when we were bench testing the performance and the output of these drives. So what we're going to do today is we're going to, on each of these volumes, we're going to pull a drive. These are drives that are sitting at 84% full. On them, they are 3 TB drives in a RAID 5. There's 3 of them. I'm going to pull one drive from the SMR. I'm going to do a very quick performance benchmark just to see how they perform in degraded RAID mode. And while I do that, I'm going to wipe the other drive, and then from there I'm going to go ahead and reintroduce the blanked drive back into the array and let the RAID rebuild. We're going to see how long it takes for that RAID rebuild to take place on this drive that's 84% full. So first thing we're going to do, of course, is rip out that drive. Before I go ahead though, I'm going to set up some equipment very quickly to wipe the disk and introduce a docking station. So live as we do this video, you'll see me wipe the content of that drive. So I'm just going to skip forward until I've got that set up for you. Right, so let's get ready. I'm going to remove the drive now. You're probably going to hear some beeping that we will mute just after it happens. I've removed bay 1 of the system. We can give it a second just to let it spin down a little bit there. And we can see it's already noticed that that drive has been removed. So while we wait for the drive to spin down so we can remove it safely, what I'm going to do is quickly disable the notifications there of the beeping because that's kind of the last thing we want there. It's going to be super annoying. So have a look there, go into more detail, find out more about it. As you can see, it has reported that the drive has been removed. And we just want to quickly go ahead and remove that beeping, if I can remember where it is, of course. So have a look there, notifications. And there we go, we've disabled that beeping. It will stop in just a second. I've got the drive now, so we're going to go ahead and remove that drive from the tray. You can hear that in the background. We're then going to introduce that drive into a dock that I've set up here. Let that drive spin up a little bit. Next thing we're going to do is go into the storage manager. So for those that aren't aware, what we need to do, and again, there's lots of ways to go about it, but going into my computer, going into manage, they'll open up a window for us. I'll reintroduce that window there. We go into storage. It will almost certainly find our drive connected, our 3 TB drive, as you can see here. And then what we need to do, because there's multiple partitions for the NAS, so we have to go ahead and remove all of those partitions to completely empty this drive. So it's going to keep doing that. We will have to refresh it from time to time. So it's going to go ahead and do all of that. And the partition manager will misread the boot record. Don't worry, it will still see it as that drive. And we've removed all of that. We can rescan the disks. And don't worry too much about the size there being reported by the disk. We're then going to safely remove this drive. Let's remove the drive. I'm going to let it spin down a little bit. And while we wait for that to spin down, we're now going to do some very quick performance testing on that SMR drive. So let's have a look at the speeds we're going to be getting. Let's go ahead and make some clones of the files inside. So we've got those test folders there, each with around 230 odd gig inside. Let's go back to the primary directory. Let's paste that into the primary. Have a little look at the performance we're getting. And again, in this kind of situation, the performance is going to be fairly terrible. It has to be said. We're just going to leave that on screen there just for about 30 seconds while we get that reported speed. And again, normally you do get around 20 to 30 megs. We're seeing an unusual spike there because we are accessing more than one drive at once. But still, it does seemingly seem to be accessible. We can go into those files perhaps, go inside, open up one of these directories. They're full of lots of random image and video files as well. We can go into some of the Plex media files that we've got in there, go into photos, access a photo perhaps, some random photo from Facebook. And again, we're seeing a little bit of lag, but not too much is what I would expect from a degraded volume there. And again, we've got that speed there coming up, not a huge kind of blisteringly fast speed here we're getting there in the background, but still nevertheless, I'm quite pleased with that. I think that's okay. It is still operational. To what degree will be interesting, because obviously what we're doing now with SMR drives, they have very differently leveraged read and write because of the overlap that, you know, makes up the namesake of SMR. So now what I'm going to do is get this drive back into the tray, and then I'm going to reintroduce this drive, and we're going to see how long it takes the system to rebuild our drive here with the full RAID, rebuild using the blank drive. So there we go. I'm going to head on over now. Actually, what we'll do first, we might cancel that operation because that will affect our results. Let's go ahead and rebuild it. Let's go. So the new drive has been introduced. We're just going to wait for it there to report that it's found the disk. So we go into hard drives. We can see that it has initialized the drive. So what we can do now is go into our storage pool, go into degraded, and we can action and repair the RAID array. We're pulling that disk over, click next. So let us know that disk will be erased. We're not going to go with resilvering. It's not really an option on a Synology in the same way. So we're going to let that do its thing. And now we're going to see how long it takes for this RAID to rebuild using these DM SMR drives. We've got the reported beginning, the storage pool degradation there. And right now it is 8:36 AM. So what I'm going to do now is fast forward to the completion of this RAID rebuild to see how long it takes for the DM SMR RAID 5 to complete its RAID rebuild. Let's fast forward. Okay, so fast forward and we have completed our RAID rebuild of the DM SMR drives. As you can see there, it's completely finished, the drives are healthy, and it has been reported as successfully repaired. If we open up the notification center, we can see that it was finished at 1 minute past 4, just about 10 minutes ago, which means overall it took just under 7.5 hours to complete this RAID 5 rebuild of drive managed shingled magnetic recording WD Red drives. That's quite the mouthful. So without further ado, let's go ahead and repeat this exact same procedure on the second pool that's utilizing those CMR drives in bays 4, 5 and 6. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to head over and remove a drive from that CMR pool once again, and therefore we're going to be able to see what happens to this RAID rebuild and see how long it takes. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that drive now. There we go, the drive has been removed. So now we can have a little look and see if we've got any issues being reported on the storage pool. And we can see that the system has once again registered the degradation of that RAID. So now let's go into the system and deactivate that notification. In the hardware, let's have a look. Where's the hardware and power tool? Let's go ahead and disable that beep. We've remembered how to do it this time. So there we go. The system is now working in degraded mode. I'm going to do some read writing very quickly on the CMR area. We've got all of our data there. So let's go in and copy a test folder. And while the system does that, I'll go ahead and wipe this drive. So let's copy that into there. And we'll see what performance speeds we're going to be achieving during this. And while that happens, we're going to go ahead and take our 3TB WD red drive and we're going to wipe all the data that's currently on it. We're seeing already earlier performance highs at 63, but we're not hitting some of the 100 megs and above that we saw earlier. Just moved away from the mic to introduce that drive into our docking station. So once again, we're going to go into the storage manager and wipe this drive, all live for you guys on camera. Move that there, going to computer, going to manage. Hopefully access the management panel here. It's taking its sweet time to boot up here. On the other tab, we go into storage, disk management, and once again, we're just going to delete some of those partitions there and remove them to free up all the available data and space on this drive. One by one. It's doing that there in the background. While we do that, we can take a little look at the read and write speed there happening in the background. And deleted, so we've now freed that up. We'll safely remove that drive from the system. And now I'll go ahead and remove the drive. Slowly reintroduce it into the tray. And we'll reintroduce this drive into the RAID storage system. I think we've seen enough of that transfer, so we're just going to deactivate that activity now. We're going to deactivate that task. And now we're going to reintroduce this drive into the RAID array. 1 second. We've reintroduced the drive physically into the system. It's already still reporting the RAID degradation, and now we can go ahead and recheck our storage pool. The new drive has been registered. There it is there, the not initialized drive, seeing it as a brand new drive. So now in this storage pool, we can go to action and repair, pull the new drive over, click next, and now our RAID will begin rebuilding. Let's get the settings open there, and the RAID is rebuilding now at 1617. And we're going to take a good look to see how long it takes to rebuild this RAID. Remember, the score of the DM SMR drives was 7 hours and 25 minutes. So it's going to be interesting to see how long this takes. But for now, I'm going to fast forward to the completion of this exercise to see how they compare. Right, so we're back to the Synology DSM user interface here, and I'm pleased to say that the CMR volume, the RAID 5 there, storage pool has completed its RAID rebuild. If we go into the time management, we can see that it finished at 34 minutes past midnight. So ultimately, what that means is when we look at the times, we can see that it actually took longer for the CMR drives because of that lack of cache there to complete this RAID build. It was just under an hour difference between them, so that is a noticeable degree, certainly larger than some of the ones we've seen in our previous testing. The RAID 5 building, of course, was another prime example of that. So again, it did look, that's quite surprising that, because I kind of assumed that the SMR drives would ultimately give us a slower performance there. Now, in our next video, we will be looking at RAID 5 performance over 10 GBE. So in our next video, we will be using these exact same RAID 5s that we've created, 3 drives apiece, and doing 10 GBE speed tests on AJA, on Blackmagic, and a Windows upload and download speed, all of which being conducted over 10 GBE. Now, of course, these 3 drives are not going to give us anywhere near the saturation required for a full 10 GBE connection, so none of these RAID 5 groups are going to give us 1000 megs. But the beauty of this test will be that we're not going to have a bottleneck in hardly any area of this test. We're going to be utilizing NVMe Windows system. We're going to be using a Thunderbolt to 10G adapter. We're going to be using a 10 GB equipped NAS in the 1621XS Plus, and we're going to be utilizing a Xeon powered NAS. So almost no bottlenecks will be apparent to us. So it's going to be very interesting to see the top end read-write of these drives. We're going to run them for about a minute for each of these tests just to see if there are any degradations, and we're going to be looking at those average performance speeds all between them. But going back to our previous test, the one we're on right now, it's still surprising to me that we did see a dip in overall RAID rebuild on those CMR drives. Now, this is something we are going to closely examine. There are lots of things that we could have changed in this test, of course. We could have used a larger RAID array, but I think that would have invalidated a few of our earlier testing, particularly the 10 GB one coming up soon, where we want to keep it within that 1000 megs. The other thing we could do is attempt a RAID rebuild while simultaneously accessing the RAID array to try and max out those drives. But we have to make sure we're utilizing environments that are going to be realistic, and I'm not sure how many of us would continue to bombard read-write requests on a system on this level, at least on a 6-bay, where we would RAID rebuild and frequently access data simultaneously. And I do think that's an area where the DM-SMR drives would struggle. But again, that seems like something more high-end rack mount users would use that have a rotational system in their storage array. They're the only users I can think of that would behave in that manner on a RAID rebuild. I'm not sure you would find that on this. But I do still maintain CMR being the superior build there, and you can see why. I mean, WD had to kind of make that distinction between them after not detailing DMSMR on those data sheets before. But I'm going to wrap things up here. Do stay tuned for the next test where we'll be looking at the RAID 10 performance of these RAID 5s with differing WD Reds, and I have got a single drive analysis as well, utilizing Blackmagic and AJA of just single WD Red drives from each group, just to see the difference between individual drives being tested and them in a group RAID array. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, let me know. Click like if you did. Click subscribe to learn more, and I'll see you next time.